What if I told you that right now, thousands of people around the world are convinced that Earth is not a globe, but a flat surface surrounded by a giant wall of ice? It sounds absurd. But this idea has made a huge comeback and racked up millions of views online. The strangest part is that this theory blends distrust, conspiracy, misunderstood science, and questions that, at first glance, can seem almost reasonable. So what exactly does the flat Earth theory claim? Why do so many people still believe it? And what are the weirdest facts and contradictions behind this idea? Stick around until the end, because the deeper you go into this topic, the more unbelievable it gets. To many people, the flat Earth theory sounds like one of those ideas that should have stayed buried in the distant past, but it didn't. In the age of smartphones, satellites, space missions, GPS, and instant access to information, there is still an entire movement dedicated to arguing that Earth is not round. And the most surprising part is not just that this belief exists. It is that it has grown during a time when we have more access to information than ever before. That reveals something fascinating about human behavior. Belief is not always based only on evidence. Often, it is shaped by storytelling, emotion, identity, and the feeling of having uncovered a hidden truth. That is when the flat Earth theory stops being just a strange idea and becomes a cultural phenomenon. Today, you'll understand what flat earthers believe, where this idea came from, and why it still attracts so much attention. What the flat Earth theory claims. Let's start with the basics. The flat Earth theory claims that Earth is not a sphere floating in space, but a flat surface, almost like a giant disk. In this model, the North Pole sits at the center of the world. Antarctica, instead of being a continent at the bottom of the planet, is described as a massive ice wall surrounding the entire Earth, acting like a boundary that keeps the oceans and continents from spilling over. That idea alone is bizarre enough, because once you think about it, this model completely changes everything we learn about geography, astronomy, gravity, seasons, time zones, and even how day and night work. In this theory, the sun and moon are also not hundreds of thousands or millions of miles away as science shows. Instead, they are said to be much smaller objects, much closer to Earth, moving above this flat plane. In other words, for the flat Earth theory to work, you would have to rebuild almost the entire modern understanding of the universe. And that is exactly what many believers try to do. Why some people believe it. Now comes an even more interesting part. A lot of people hear about this theory and think, how could anyone believe that? But the answer is not that simple. One of the main reasons is that flat Earth arguments often appeal to everyday observation. For example, believers say the horizon looks flat, and for someone who has never studied the subject in depth, that can sound convincing. A person looks out at the ocean, sees what appears to be a straight line, and thinks, if Earth were curved, shouldn't I be able to see it easily? The problem is that Earth is enormous. The curvature exists, but it does not appear in the simplistic way many people imagine. Another reason is distrust of institutions. Many flat Earth believers think space agencies, governments, scientists, and major organizations are lying to the public. So for them, any evidence presented by science is automatically dismissed as fake. And here is the crucial point. Once someone enters a mindset where every piece of contrary evidence is considered part of the conspiracy, it becomes very hard to convince that person otherwise. At that point, the theory no longer depends on proof. It survives on suspicion. They say images of Earth are fake. One of the most well-known claims is that many flat earthers believe images of Earth from space are fake, edited or completely fabricated. According to this view, photos taken by satellites and space missions are part of a global hoax. This is one of the most striking parts of the theory, because it requires believing in an enormous conspiracy involving decades of astronomy, engineering, navigation, telecommunications, and science. Think about the scale of that for a moment. You would have to imagine that thousands upon thousands of professionals across rival countries with competing interests have all maintained the exact same lie for generations. And yet, for believers, that explanation can seem more acceptable than the standard scientific one. That shows how conspiracy theories work. They offer people the feeling that they have seen something the crowd has missed. And that feeling of waking up to the truth can be extremely powerful. Gravity is one of the theory's biggest problems. Another major issue is how the flat Earth theory tries to explain gravity. Since the scientific model uses gravity to explain why everything stays on Earth's surface, the flat Earth model needs another explanation. Some believers claim the flat Earth is constantly accelerating upward. Others try to replace gravity with alternative ideas that are far less consistent. But this creates a massive problem. Without gravity as we understand it, almost everything starts to fall apart. Planetary orbits, the moon's motion, tides, falling objects, the atmosphere, star formation, all of it has to be reinvented. So the flat Earth theory does not just question the shape of Earth. It ends up conflicting with a huge portion of the knowledge built by physics and astronomy. Eratosthenes figured this out more than 2,000 years ago. Now here is an incredible historical fact. More than 2,000 years ago, long before rockets, satellites, or modern telescopes, the mathematician and astronomer Eratosthenes found a brilliant way to show that Earth was round. He noticed that in one city at noon, sunlight reached the bottom of a well without casting a shadow. In another city, at the same time, an object did cast a shadow on the ground. From that difference, he concluded that Earth's surface had to be curved. And he did not stop there. Using math and observation, he even estimated Earth's circumference with impressive accuracy for his time. That is fascinating because it shows that the idea of a spherical Earth is not modern. It was already defended in ancient times by people who observed the world carefully and used logical reasoning. So, why did the flat Earth idea come back? This may be the most interesting question of all. If there is already so much evidence, why has this theory gained traction again? The answer has a lot to do with the Internet. The Internet has a powerful ability to revive old ideas, mix facts with bad interpretations, and turn everything into highly shareable content. Short videos, clips, debates, dramatic thumbnails, provocative titles, all of these help controversial theories spread quickly. And one thing strongly favors this kind of content: emotion. The flat Earth theory sparks shock, outrage, curiosity, and debate. And online, the more reaction an idea creates, the more it circulates. There is also an important psychological factor. Some people feel that accepting an alternative theory places them in a special group, as if they have access to secret knowledge the rest of the public does not. That sense of belonging helps keep the belief alive. The strangest contradictions. Now we get to a part that is almost unbelievable. Many flat Earth believers use technologies that rely on calculations based on the spherical model of Earth. GPS, satellites, telecommunications, flight routes, astronomical predictions, navigation systems, all of these depend on extremely well-tested scientific models. In other words, modern life itself contradicts the theory, and that is one of the biggest ironies of the entire topic. A person may reject science in words, but in everyday life, they still benefit from technologies built by the very science they deny. Another contradiction appears with time zones. If Earth were flat in the way this theory claims, consistently explaining why it is daytime in one part of the world and nighttime in another would be much harder than it sounds. The same applies to eclipses, constellations visible from different hemispheres, and long-distance navigation routes. Each of these things on its own creates problems for the flat Earth model. Put together, they make the theory harder and harder to defend. The fascination behind the absurd. But maybe the most interesting thing about flat Earth is not the arguments themselves. It is the fascination the theory creates. because deep down, this topic is less about geography and more about human behavior. It shows how people are drawn to mysteries, how they like the feeling of discovering something forbidden, how they distrust authority, and how a well-told story can sometimes feel more powerful than a correct explanation. That is why Flat Earth still gets attention, not because it is scientifically strong, but because it is narratively seductive. It turns the world into one giant mystery, and when a mystery is presented well, it captures the human mind. At the end of the day, the Flat Earth theory is a mix of historical curiosity, misinformation, distrust, and fascination with conspiracy. It may seem funny to some people and frustrating to others, but it also serves as a warning. Because today, it is not enough for information to exist. It has to be understood, it has to be explained, it has to compete for attention against stories that are becoming more emotional and more viral every day. And maybe the biggest lesson is this: truth does not always win on its own. It also has to be communicated well. If you enjoyed this topic and want more videos about bizarre theories, mysteries, and strange beliefs that many people accept without questioning, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.